The road went on through a shadeless burn, and for miles there were only the charred shapes of trees in a dead land, where nothing moved save the windy rifts of ash. Late in the day, the road brought him into a swamp, and that was all. Before him stretched a spectral waste out of which reared only the naked trees and attitudes of agony and dimly hominoid, like figures in a landscape of the damned. A faintly smirking garden of the dead that tended away to the earth's curve. He tried his foot in the mire before him, and it rose in a vulvate welt, claggy and sucking. He stepped back. A stale wind blew from this desolation, and the marsh reeds and the black ferns among which he stood clashed softly like things chained. And he wondered why a road should come to such a place. Contemporary readers of Cormac McCarthy's fiction might point to the road as his bleakest novel, and the culmination of his middle and late period. Set in the post-apocalyptic landscape, the narrative follows the journey of a father and his son through an ashen wasteland devoid of life and sunlight, and that is plagued by a freezing cold and bands of roaming cannibals. While many people have come to imagine this wasteland as a consequence of nuclear holocaust, and thus as a final testament to humankind's callous and violent disregard for life, there are those who highlight that a nuclear event would not result in such an overtly grim landscape, but rather a land of blue skies and virid green. The disaster that befalls the planet may thus be seen to be of a different order, one that, given the increased prominence of eco-criticism, may yet be man-made in the form of climate change. The novel in this light would be a story of humankind as the architects of our own destruction. I would call for a grave attentiveness to the world around us and our impact upon it. There is a strain of thought, however, that would identify this unspecified disaster as something like that of a meteor strike. That is, as an event humankind has no power to stop or prepare for. From this perspective, the setting of the road presents no moral or message or call to action. It highlights instead the brute fact that connects us, for all our intellectual, cultural, and technological development, to not only the earlier stages of human life in the face of a monstrous flood or the caprice of a god, but to life itself. That is, to the fact of our being subject to forces beyond our control. The road begins, in other words, against the backdrop that our fate is ultimately out of our hands. That for all our thought concerning what we can do to heal the planet and to damage it, we are fundamentally helpless. This position is of radical importance to the fiction. It is from the idea that we cannot do anything for ourselves, that we suddenly can become to be seen as in need of help, or indeed of salvation. He walked out in the grey light and stood, and he saw for a brief moment the absolute truth of the world, the cold, relentless circling of the understood earth, darkness implacable, the blind dogs of the sun and their rumming, the crushing black vacuum of the universe. The horror that man experiences here is not of human being itself, of what we might recognize in the world of the novel as horrifying, its capacity for violence, its barbarism, its cruelty and savagery, but of its place as part of this hungry, cosmological darkness. Death and its execution seem perfectly natural within this dispensation, and thus what is horrifying about the marauders and cannibals of the novel is not their acts, but their strange harmony with an innately savage world. This vision is most vividly articulated in what some readers would describe as Cormac McCarthy's greatest aesthetic achievement, Blood Meridian, or the Evening Redness in the West, a monumental work of fiction that towers over the American literary landscape of the late 20th century, and describes, on one level at least, the imperialist conquest of the West. Few novelists have proven willing or able to construct such a crushing portrayal of human brutality, Following the profligate Glanton gang as they tear across Mexico and the American Southwest of the 1850s. The novel, as one scholar puts it, presents the reader with a vision of evil allowed to run rampant and unchecked in a land where the rocks would pluck the flesh from your hands, and where other than rock, nothing was. There is no relief, no hope of escape. Journeys only take the traveler into a land more hostile yet, where men with burned out eyes grow gaunt and lank under the white-hot suns of those days, until they appear like beings for whom the sun hungered. In discussing this dimension of the novel, I defer to the insight of Petra Mundik, who sees the novel's key image of the sun not to represent traditional notions of renewal or elimination, but death and violence, inverting its Platonic conception as a visible manifestation of the good. The top of this sun, I quote, rose out of nothing like the head of a great red phallus until it cleared the unseen rim and sat squat and pulsing and malevolent behind them. In this light, the sun is not indifferent to human life. We matter but only as the objects of its appetite. As the sun is described as being the color of steel, the novel not only evokes the blacksmith's fire of warfare, but also recalls the place of the sun as one of an infinite number of silver stars. For those who inhabit this landscape, for those beleaguered by its deathly heat, sunset with the evening redness in the west is not a constellation. Instead, a curtain is unveiled to an unfathomable host of trillions upon trillions of stars, not unlike our own. The universe in this sense is not cold and empty in the manner of absence, but monstrously oppressive in its presence. It is thus not only the heat that saps human life, but as the novel turns our gaze again and again to the stars, the knowledge of this horrific abundance itself, of this infinity that is perhaps best represented as same, dead, the constitutive makeup of the earth itself. The night sky lies so spread with stars that there is scarcely space of black at all, and they fall all night in bitter arcs, and it is so that their numbers are no less. Like the wasteland of the road, the surreal, nightmarish desert landscape of Blood Meridian thus registers a certain existential outlook, one that sees human being as oppressed by the weight of its own insignificance, and further as without any means of transcendence. There is no high nature, no high principle, no higher order. The cool and pale fire of the stars, which for Plato and the Stoics suggest the purest embodiment of reason, instead belie an unfathomable, fiery, pulsating malevolence, under which the marauders of the Glanton gang brandish weapons of blood-stained steel against all without discrimination, like visitors from some heathen land where they and others like them feed on human flesh. The context the Glanton gang comprises a motley crew of mercenary scalp hunters, who comport themselves with a degree of brutality and savagery that is not constrained by their express purpose, more by questions of race, class, age, and gender. Their violence is boundless, and so a story about the imperialist conquest of the West becomes a story about a land where violence is natural, and indeed inevitable. As scholar Harold Bloom reminds us, none of Blood Meridian's carnage is gratuitous or redundant. It belonged to the Mexico-Texas borderlands in 1849 to 1850, which is where and when most of the novel is set. No group is distinguished by their conduct, and as Bill Baines writes, the book's inhumanity is not, as is often the case in Westerns, the cruelty of white to Indian or Indian to white, but the cruelty of human to human. Piping on flutes made from human bones, the Comanches are described as a horde from hell more horrible yet than the brimstone land of Christian reckoning, screeching and yammering and clothed in smoke like those vaporous beings in regions beyond right knowing, where the eye wanders and the jerks and drools. The lone figure we might describe as the novel's hero, a name was adolescent referred to only as the kid, is similarly unredeemed. While we may distinguish him from the gang, his position as one of them is not merely the results of chance, but rather is in accord with the earliest description of his nature. He can neither read nor write Leotald, and in him broods already a taste for mindless violence. He, like the marauders, like the Comanches, is part of this landscape, in which everything devours everything else, even the beginnings of what we might recognize as goodness. The kid recalls a long-standing feature of McCarthy's work, which are its stolid, inarticulate protagonists who predominate his early fiction in particular, and inhabit their strange and at times wonderful Appalachian setting. Unlike the colossal waste of the road or the night-nourished plains and desert of Meridian, unlike McCarthy's first novel, The Orchid Keeper, published in 1965, concerns a world that is vanishing, that will become myth, legend, dust, and is in this sense precious. It's, in other words, about loss and the experience of loss, and is therefore also about holding on and the experience of holding on. The encroachment of a band of marauders or cannibals, or the celestial bodies of the universe, but rather modernity itself in the form of civil, social, and cultural change, poses the greatest threat in this regard, and it is the presence of not a pack of vicious-looking humans, bearded, barbarous, clad in the skins of animals stitched up with thews and armed with weapons of every description, dangerous, filthy, brutal, but faceless lawmen in their bland uniform of clean, grey chinos that signals the end, as a desire for a space beyond the domination of laws suddenly becomes impossible, and one's autonomy a matter to be negotiated. The three principal voices of the novel, the isolationist Arthur Ornby, the young John Wesley Ratner, and the bootlegger Marion Silda, shun human society, rarely talked, barely think. As the scholar Vareen Bell suggests, are linked by the intuition that one should be able to live as one chooses. The problem, of course, is that they do not each possess the power to do so, nor the will to consolidate their inclinations. A dumper in a community whose ethos is never shared and for whom freedom takes the almost perverse form of isolation and disconnectedness. While they might fantasize about a more comprehensive return to nature, where they could build a log house with a fireplace and would not have to care for no man, these characters are never able to develop a relationship with the land itself that is truly harmonious. However they might try to live in accord with its weather and seasons, something alien occupies the darkness, something terrible lingers in the wood, and something in turn calls them back, to build a fire and construct a wall. What repels them in the Appalachian Mountains, what is being rejected from nature, may be said to be human being itself, which is not in its essence animal or material, but the consciousness of our difference. Night is quiet, like the camp before battle. The city beset by a thing unknown who will it come from forest or sea. The ranges of wall the pale, the gates is shot. But lo, the thing's inside, and can you guess his shape? Where he's capped, or what's the counter of his face? Is he a weaver, bloody shuttle shot through a time warp? A carter of souls from the world's map? Or a hunter with hounds? Or did burn horses draw his dead cart through the streets, and does he call his trade to each? Dear friend, he is not to be dwelt upon, for it is by such wise that he's invited aid. At the opening of the Orchid Keeper, a body is found and buried among the trees. Here we see an image, at the earliest stage of McCarthy's fiction, of what human harmony with nature truly looks like in the form of death, or more precisely at the death of human consciousness. As organic matter, human life goes on, and in a way that appears unavailable to us. Our bodies may become truly at one with the weathers and seasons, rejoicing with new growth and flowers the coming of spring, or with silence and dormancy the advent of winter. As a retreat from the wild, order, civilization, the law, thus become a means of preservation and self-affirmation, at least to the extent that they are animated by the knowledge that the call to the wild is a call to death. Nature hungers for us, and grasping our bodies for nourishment that renders as alien all that would shy away from it. And yet implicit here is the knowledge that our bodies have already betrayed us. That with each day, each excretion, each intake and exhalation of breath, we are already joined in a circle of life from which we cannot escape even by living, rendering human freedom as little more than a dream, or indeed as myth, legend, dust. This is the premise upon which McCarthy's fiction can be seen to begin, and also the problem it necessarily attempts to transcend in the act of writing, of making life meaningful. This is not a selfish task, but one that takes seriously the lives of those around him, their agony, their despair, and their suffering. McCarthy's novel Suttree, published in 1979, is exemplary of this position, and presents the harsh and unforgiving world of the marginalized and neglected underclasses of Knoxville, Tennessee, wherein what the novel describes is encampment of the damned. No soul shall walk save you, is Knoxville's man's humanity, is central to the novel's representation of the city. In the same breath as I reference the soot-black brick or cobbled corridors of the city streets, the narrator of Suttree's Prologue describes the drunk and harmless, of washed up in the lee of walls and alleys or abandoned lots. As if like the cats that go forth high-shouldered and lean in the grim primitives of art, Knoxville's marginalized but another aspect of the city's detritus, the grime and soot that fills its streets. Time and time again, the text confronts us with Knoxville's helpless and disfigured, who occupy the streets like misshapen vending machines. Along Market Square, for example, a legless beggar sits mounted on a board like a piece of ghastly taxidermy, and fights for whatever he can when he draws in the strength of his resolve to bite and tear his antagonist's flesh. Further down, by Vine Avenue, beside an old cripple who hobbles on his twisted legs like a broken disciple, another cripple, who seems to have washed up on the paving, like a piece of dark and horrid flora, lies at their wasted leg over the walkway like a charred tree limb, as though she were impaled upon the floor of the city like a medieval felon. In McCarthy's Knoxville, barbarism does not take the form of extreme violence, but derives from the conditions of the city streets, where life itself appears as a form of vicious punishment. This image not only registers the harrowing conditions of the city streets, where every other face is gloited, twisted, cheated with some excrescence, teeth black with rot, eyes ruined and vacuous, but also how the situation of Knoxville's maimed humanity does not seem to warrant intervention, as though their situation is deserved. The problem that is faced and posed by Suttree concerns the possibility of change and transformation, of uncovering some form of action that would offer him release, not only from his guilt at what he sees in the fall of Knoxville's maimed humanity, but also in the knowledge that everything he suffers, whether physical pain, mental anguish, or spiritual desolation, is rightly deserved in view of the fact that we, as human beings, have done nothing. Yet our innocence is not emancipatory, but damning, as it highlights our lack of involvement, and by extension the absence of some higher ethical drive that would compel us to act. From one perspective at least, McCarthy's fiction, and representing the full complexity of human barbarism, sees this problem to involve a failure of understanding, of our incapacity to truly grasp the terrible evanescence of human existence, its finitude as something precious. Writing in turn is that described a certain ethical value in its capacity to make us see, to haunt our dreams, and to thus preserve what is being lost. The question then for us as readers, as human beings, is whether there is enough for us to be saved from oblivion.